more people come up that were in the last session than they're coming up. So.
How's everybody over here doing? Good. How are you? Good.
We could probably just start with a quick introduction. This is our panel. Why don't each one of you just give your name and a little bit, just a very brief background of what your experience is with the Republican Party. Just really quick. So we'll start with one and Dave here.
My name is Dave Franklin. I've been an activist in the Republican Party since 2007. I've worked on a couple presidential campaigns, some state house campaigns, ran for office once, and I'm a sitting member of the executive committee in Washtenaw County.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Koziara. I am the vice chair of the College of Republicans at the University of Michigan, actually over in Ann Arbor. I've been involved in Republican politics, I don't know how long, since 2004. Yeah, that sounds right. I'm also involved in the Michigan Federation of College Republicans, which is a statewide organization, and I've been involved in a number of other conservative Republican leading initiatives. I was just recently in CPAC, in Washington, D.C. for CPAC this past weekend, which is the Conservative Political Action Conference, so that was very fun.
Good morning. My name is Stacy. Swimp. I am the president of the Frederick Douglass Society, which is a conservative public policy institution, emphasis on freedom to work, freedom to learn. But I'm also a member of the Michigan Republican Party, past executive board, executive committee member for the Saginaw, Michigan Republican Party, and I do a lot of traveling, speaking on conservative issues, Republican issues, particularly as it relates to outreach in the urban community. I do not believe in an urban agenda. I do not believe that that's a Republican responsibility, but I do believe we have a responsibility to take our message out there and apply it in a way where people understand that we are all inclusive. So that's what I try to focus on.
I'm Koss. My involvement in Republican conservative politics goes back to about 2002-2003. I was the college Republican chairman at Oakland University when I was a student there, and since have worked in the political industry in a number of capacities. I'm currently doing political consulting, multi-client political consulting. I've worked for Senate Majority Leader Mike Bishop in the past, and a number of other clients. Michigan Conservative Union, I'm a board member of the Michigan Conservative Union, and currently, I don't know if I hold a title in the GOP besides precinct delegate, but I've been involved in and active in conservative causes and in the Republican Party for now about 8 years.
Great, thank you, panel. Well, it looks like everybody's here. It's going to show up, and just a reminder, the name of this breakout session is a time to take a closer look at the Republican Party's positive message for America. And with that, I'm just going to start asking questions, and we'll take turns in, just kind of get a nice discussion going, and at the end, I'll take audience participation as well. Okay, here's the first question. Why do you think the Republican Party best stands for freedom and opportunity for all, and for more specifically for college students? Why don't we start with Brian?
Okay, great. Well, I think there's a number of different areas in which the Republican Party stands out from on their message, on our message about in 3 areas that I would like the party to focus on in 2012. One of that would be spending reform, the other area, economic growth, and the third area, restoring community. And I think that all 3 of those are very important in sort of unifying. And it particularly gets to college students and young people in a number of different ways. I think that entitlement reform is a big issue that gets to young people. The idea that Social Security and Medicare and now the new health care policy that we don't quite know the results of are huge budgetary issues. Those entitlements are eating up more than 50% of our budget currently and growing. And I think young people are getting a raw deal on that. They're not necessarily going to be there for us, so unless we change them drastically, we've got to do something about that. The second is the economic growth message, which I think is extremely important because everybody goes to college to better their lives. And unless we could find employment, gainful employment after we graduate from college, all else seems to be lost, and our investment in our future is lost. And then the third one is restoring community. And what I think that really comes down to is a limited government message that says that, well, Washington can't provide effectively for our local communities and our states. And I think that it turns that message or that negative stereotype that the Republican Party and conservatives are cold-hearted or don't care about the downtrodden or the lower income folks, and it puts it in a different perspective, in that decentralizing the government and building up from the bottom up would actually be a more effective model for attending to social matters.
Thank you, Brian. Brian Koziara from University of Michigan. Let's hear it from a student's perspective here, since we are addressing how we feel the Republican Party is the opportunity for all of us for college students.
Thanks, Bill. There's two major perspectives that I would look at this question from in terms of freedom and opportunity for college students and graduates. First of all, you look at it from a micro perspective. Really, when it comes down to opportunity, individual opportunity, making sure that people have the ability to do what they're going to do in life and succeed at what they're studying in school or what they want to pursue as a career. When you look at the two main parties in American politics, Republican Party versus Democrat Party, you see two different ideologies. One party wants to remove barriers to job growth and job opportunity and an individual's ability to really chart their own way in life, and that's the Republican Party. And the Democrat Party, on the other hand, they want to create programs which can be beneficial in some regards for unemployment and getting people back to work, but at the same time, it's kind of like I don't want to call it a trap, but for lack of better terms, a trap, because there's that level of dependency on those programs. So when you look at which party really fosters the environment of individual opportunity and somebody able to take their own initiative and build their own company or start their own firm or take some sort of job with another company and really have the most opportunities possible, I think at the end of the day it's really the Republican Party. When you look at it in the macro view, which is the second perspective that I'd like to bring up, it comes down to really creating the best environment economically for growth here in our nation and also abroad. Strong American economic growth translates into growth abroad, and really being able to say, okay, what do we need to put in place? What measures do we need to maybe scale back a little bit? What regulations can we get rid of that allow businesses to create jobs, put people back to work, and create positive economic growth in the United States? And when you look at the pro-growth agenda of the Republican Party, a lot of people will attack the GOP for saying, oh, we need to lower taxes on corporations, we need to lower taxes on people who are making a certain amount of money every year. But when you look at it, we want to make sure that we're attracting those corporations and those companies to come to America and employ people in America, and make sure that they have the necessary ingredients they need in that mix to put people back to work and create positive economic growth, which at the end of the day helps everybody in terms of macro scale.
Thank you, Brian. Anyone else want to add to that, to this question, or should we move on to the next one?
I'd like to add to it.
Okay.
They've spoken a lot on the opportunity aspect, but I'd talk a little more about the freedom aspect. There's different wings of the Republican Party. It's what they call it the Big Ten. There's the religious right, there's the libertarian right, there's the moderates, there's the more liberal. There's a huge spectrum within the GOP, and they're always vying for a little more influence amongst that. But at this present time, if you look at all the demographics and the studies that are coming out, the youth of America are far more fiscally conservative and socially tolerant than they were in the past. So when it comes to opportunity, they spoke on how the Republican Party is best for economic solutions, but really the future of America's freedom and liberties is in the more, I would argue, and I'm kind of biased, the more libertarian wing of the Republican Party, because that's an expanding one with more influence. And they understand that for America to be successful, you have to have limited government when it comes to economics, but you also have to allow people to make choices that even if they're harmful to themselves, as long as they harm no one else, that's okay. And one big thing is marijuana in Michigan. There's a petition going around to decriminalize marijuana completely in the state of Michigan. They're filling up those petition sheets very quickly. This is something where within the Republican Party there's a lot of contention, but we're willing to accept each other's differences and work together. And in the end, things like that are going to advance the marketplace and do better for everyone else. And there's more room for entrepreneurship in such areas. So You won't see that, though, in the Democratic Party typically. It's not as big a tent. There's not as much room for discussion and opinion, differences of opinion, and you'll have more influence and say in an organization that accepts you and wants to bring you in and talk about these issues and debate them than one that is more closed-minded. So.
Sure. When you ask a question, what something stands for, immediately I begin to think about what holds it up, the platform. The platform of the Republican Party has always been one of freedom and progress. Frederick Douglass knew this. This is why when he was around, he said something that I think still stands. He said that I am a black Republican, and I never intend to belong to anything, he said, except the party of freedom and progress. You have to understand why the Republican Party was founded to begin with. The genesis of this party, it was founded to prevent slavery from advancing to the Western territories. And from its inception, the Republican Party has always represented the American people, particularly people who didn't have a voice. And so we're not just talking about black Americans, but we're talking about anybody and everybody that have found themselves to be marginalized, that have found themselves to be ostracized, to be discriminated against. This party has always been the party to represent that demographic. And history shows this to be true, not only from a perception standpoint, but from a legislative standpoint. What am I talking about? I'm talking about bills. When you go back and you find out who actually voted for the Civil Rights Bill, who voted for the Voting Rights Act, who voted for the early Civil Rights Bills of the late 1800s, who voted for Emancipation Proclamation. The Republican Party has always, and I mean absolutely always, represented freedom and progress from a legislative standpoint and from a relationship standpoint. So it's very important to understand that we're not just saying that because it's politically expedient to say that, and we're not just saying that because it's something to say. The record shows it, it's tangible, it's equitable, and it's provable. So I just want to put that one out there.
Actually, kind of off what you're saying, I'm not really familiar with the politics of it yet, but I'm very into raising money and creating awareness for human trafficking at the moment. I'm actually creating a student org here. And you're saying the Republican Party has always been backing of like freeing people, like you said, the slaves back in the Civil War. What is the Republican Party doing now for human trafficking?
For human trafficking?
Yeah.
Great question. I'll tell you what, first thing is, a lot of Americans in general, that's a great issue. A good friend of mine, Kenneth Morris Jr., who was a great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass and the founder of the Frederick Douglass Family Foundation, this is what they fight for. And a lot of people, a lot of Americans don't know this is a crisis. So I think that you do have some people within Congress who are Republican and fair, and just to be fair, and some Democrats who are working together on the human trafficking issue. But I want to say that I think that's a new awareness. I think people are just becoming aware of how serious that issue is. And I think that we can tie that into border control and immigration as well, because a lot of illegal immigrants are finding themselves to be victims, if you will, of human traffickers. So that's I think we all have room to grow and working. And I don't want to put aside that issue. But I just want to say that I think you can count on Republicans in the House and the Senate as they become more educated about these kind of issues to do what we've always done as a party, which is to be an anti-slavery, if you will, anti-slavery platform. Okay.
Thank you, Stacy. Let's move on to the next question. What are some myths of the Republican Party that are out there? And why do you think they're myths and contradictory to what the Republican Party really stands for? Stacy, go ahead, you can start this.
Well, the biggest myth is the Republican Party is racist. I got to say that right off the top. Not just because I'm black. You did notice I'm black, right? Okay.
We don't notice these things. We don't see color.
But really, I mean, it gets ridiculous. It gets ridiculous. Everywhere I go, I hear these kind of things. Oh, you're a token. You know, I hear all these things about the. I just did a Let It Rip show out of Detroit. So one of the biggest myths that are out there, the liberal media and Democrats, as far as I'm concerned, not all of them, but many of the Democrats like to play that race card. They like to play the class warfare card. So one of the biggest myths that are out there is that black people are simply tokens or are not welcome, can't advance in the Republican Party. That's not true. I can tell you that I'm somebody, I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. I am from the inner city. Okay? I'm somebody that grew up from what we call the pit, the black bottom, and came up through literacy, youth incarceration, and a lot of trouble. And what turned me around was Republican leaders, conservative leaders who I met who didn't see black, didn't see anything other than a young person with tremendous potential, a lot of initiative. I just had it in the wrong directions. So they embraced me. Chamber of Commerce leaders who were conservative Republicans embraced me. They put me through a process, a journey, a track to freedom, individual responsibility, and entrepreneurship. So that doesn't sound to me, it doesn't look to me like a party that's racist. Just not true. So the other myth is that this is a party of wealthy people. I want you to know something, I'm broke. I am. People look at me like, no, you're not. Yes, I am. Really, this is not a party for rich people. This is not a party that only attracts people that are wealthy. You have working class citizens, you have young people, you have retirees, you have military people, you have manufacturers. This is a party that is a melting pot, if you will, of Americans of every ethnicity, every class. And this is a party that's all-inclusive. And I know this from personal experience, so I'm not just here saying that. I'm saying it because it's true. So racism, no, the Republican Party is not a racist party. Classist, the Republican Party is not a classist. You heard me say at the beginning of this panel that the Republican Party was founded on the principles of freedom and progress. The Republican Party continues to fight for labor freedom. It continues to fight for educational choice. It continues to fight for deregulations and harsh draconian policies that kill jobs across this country. So at the end of the day, it is not classist, it is not racist. So those are the two biggest myths that are out there regarding the Republican Party.
Okay, Brian Koziara has to leave at 12:30, so I'm going to give him a chance to talk about this.
I think Stacy hit it right on the head. Those are the two biggest myths that really affect the Republican Party today. And just to speak more about the wealth issue, I think there's a lot of people who think, oh, I'm a student, or oh, I'm lower income, so I can't be a Republican. I wouldn't identify with the Republican Party. It's quite to the contrary. When you look at the program for economic growth that the Republican Party is currently espousing, myself as a student, I want to make sure that there's jobs when I graduate. And in order for there to be jobs, it can't just be a government subsidized job, because I know at the end of the day that that's going to be something that someone else is paying for, that someone's getting taxed to pay for, and that's not sustainable. I want at least a job when I graduate that is going to be built from the private sector, built on the creation of wealth, whether it's through manufacturing or providing a service. I don't want something that's going to just be taking money out of someone else's taxes and paying for my salary for a government position or a government program. So really, making sure that we understand that and dispelling that myth is a big thing. There's a lot of young people who are attracted to the Democrat Party for a number of reasons. It's funny because I remember Winston Churchill had a quote. He said that if you're under 30 and you're not a liberal, you don't have a heart. He said if you're over 30 and you're not a conservative, you don't have a brain. Which I thought was kind of interesting, looking at young people being so connected emotionally to some particular issues. But then, once you get into the real world and start paying taxes and start realizing, what happens when the economy goes downhill, you look at it from a very rational perspective. But in that same regard, as far as it relates to opportunity for in particular, or lower income, I think that, again, you look at what does the Republican Party offer in terms of a macro perspective. Sure, we don't have maybe, we wouldn't promise all the same, benefits and perks for welfare that the Democrat Party would offer. We're not going to keep you on welfare permanently. But at the end of the day, is that really a good thing to be on welfare permanently? Are we really helping someone if we're just giving them a handout time and time again? Something that measures a person's self-worth, I think, is their ability to work and contribute to society. And people feel like they're worth something when they're able to go to work every day and hold a job and have that dignity of contributing to society and providing for their family, providing for others. And enabling them to do that, it's not going to come around through an unsustainable government program. Once again, that's taking money out of someone else's pocket and putting it into a program that's not sustainable. It's by growing the economy and creating good, hardworking, or good well-paying jobs for individuals and helping them grow and succeed on their own. Really, an individual's key to success is charting their own way and finding their own way, and that's really what the Republican Party is all about.
Can I go for that, please? Sure.
I want to make it clear that we are not an anti-welfare party. That's not what he was saying. I don't want anybody interpreting it that way. Frederick Douglass once said that a man may not get all that he deserves, but he must work for all that he gets. And so at the end of the day, what we are is we are a party that believes in the dignity, the will, and the faith of the American people and the honor and the integrity of the American people. So we believe that there is such thing as a hand up, but at the end of the day, we believe that that's the private citizen's responsibility and not the government. The government can't be a bailout of sorts, because where does it stop? How do you qualify that? So we're certainly not anti-welfare, but we're pro-family. And let me tell you something, one last thought. When the Great Society vision was created in 1965, black women, over 85% of all black women were married. Okay, they were married. Today, in many inner cities, over 80% of black women are single mothers. The Great Society vision did something to black families, not exclusively. I'm not saying black people are any better than anybody else, because I think the entitlement subculture is an American phenomenon. But it does have a disproportionate impact on some minority communities, particularly black people. Let me tell you something. The Great Society vision did something that slavery didn't do. It did something that Jim Crow didn't do. It decimated and destroyed the black family. And make no mistake about it, that's exactly what has happened. It has profound implications to that. So the Republican Party being pro-family is absolutely against that kind of policy. So I'm just going to let you know that.
Thank you, Stacy.
And one more thing too, as far as the welfare is concerned, like Stacy said, a hand up, not a hand down. And I think that most Republicans, the overwhelming majority, support the idea of programs that help people find work again, or retrain people, vocationally, whether in the private or public realm. And I think really that's what's important to differentiate. Too often we see people saying, "Oh, Republicans want to cut welfare; they don't want to help the poor." It's the exact opposite. In order to grow our economy, we need everyone to be back to work and really doing what they can do.
Can you expound on that a little bit and maybe send the message why you think people feel that way about the Republican Party? I mean, it's really not what the Republican Party believes, but why do you think it is a myth to begin with? What has caused people to think that way?
I think it's a convenient political talking point. It's unfortunate that so much of the media is biased in the other direction. I think it's difficult to find a truly objective viewpoint nowadays, an objective news source in the media. And I don't, both sides are guilty of it. You see it in talk radio leaning more conservative. You see cable news networks leaning more to the liberal side. And I think it's just a convenient messaging ploy. In our world today that's moving so quickly, it's difficult to pay attention in great detail to politics and to keep up with what's going on in the political world. So it's easy to put a 30-second soundbite together saying the Republican Party wants to cut welfare benefits, when in reality it might be that the Republicans are saying, like we just did recently in the state of Michigan, saying, okay, we want to limit the amount that people can collect because we want there to be incentives to give it back. We don't want people living on welfare for their entire life. So we're going to put a limit on certain benefits and provide certain benchmarks for people to meet in order to help them get out of that cycle of poverty and help themselves out.
Thank you, Brian. I know you have to leave, so feel free to leave.
I should be good for a little bit more.
Okay. Anyone else want to add on to this?
I'd like to talk about a myth, and then also someone else has touched upon kind of misconceptions about welfare. One of the big myths is that the Republican Party is filled with just old people. I mean, to be honest, half the panel here is under 30 at least. So that's already proven false just here. But the fact of the matter is, both parties are filled with old people because of the baby boomers. They're all getting old, and the majority of the population. So that's a nonsense argument. You can say the same thing about the Democrat Party. I mean, go to their conventions. They have a lot of old people too. So, and plus old people have more time than young people. They're not working as much. And so that's a big myth. Whenever someone tells you that, just ignore them. That's wrong. The other thing about welfare, though, I don't know if I'm differing with them at all. I'm just maybe giving a different perspective. I would say the Republican Party is not anti-welfare at all, but I would say the goal of the Republican Party is to get government out of welfare. Private welfare, private charity, mutual aid societies, communities and churches helping people is wonderful, and that's what we want to incentivize. But government doesn't do anything good at all. There are some functions that we rely upon government to do, but it doesn't do it as efficiently as the marketplace ever could provide, as individuals, with incentives for profit or even taking care of one another could do. So I would say the goal really is to get government welfare reduced to the point where it's not necessary and you can get rid of it and get people taking care of each other again. Because, why don't we have churches that run hospitals anymore? There are very few of those, because when the government got involved in subsidizing welfare, it took the incentive of helping one another away, because someone goes, I don't need to help someone, I just paid my taxes. That's all the help they're going to get, and they move along. So we want to have a more prosperous society, and we want to, take care of each other more, don't rely on the government because they can't do anything efficiently. And we've learned that over the 100, 200 years now in America, that every time government gets involved in something, it screws it up. And there's always bickering, and it never gets any better. So.
I'll jump onto that, and I'll take that, all this, what was said, which I agree with all of it, a little step further, spin it in a different direction. Going back to as a college student, I recall sitting in a classroom talking to a friend of mine about going to a college Republican meeting we were having, and the professor chimed in and said, are you guys going to go stomp the poor at that meeting? So, I mean, that's those negative stereotypes, the stopping the poor, kicking old people out on the streets, if you're going to reform Social Security and things like that. Well, and I think that, the principles of what these guys were talking about are exactly right. And then there's the question of how to do these things, and from a solution standpoint. And I think there's some good ideas out there right now in terms of there's two aspects of it. There's how to do the public policy side, and then there's how to restore the true sense of community, or what Alexis de Tocqueville called the civil society. The civil society is that which exists outside of government. Like Dave mentioned, the church, the family, the community organizations and things like that. How do you build society from the ground up, not from the top down? So on the public policy side of that, we've got some solutions out there, such as block granting Medicare back to the states, allowing local state governments to deal with those better than the federal government could. So possibly the decentralization of political power and of the amount of money and the type of system we currently have of sending money to Washington just to send back to us, we'd be better off in a lot of ways building from the ground up, or addressing our particular problems at the local level rather than at the national level.
Thank you, Brian. I do have some more questions, but I think I'll take a break and ask if anybody from the audience would like to ask a panel question.
I would like to basically see how you guys feel about the bailout to the General Motors board and also to the banks. Now, my mother works for General Motors. Now, I can tell you that I would not be here right now if General Motors had not received the bailout. Now, how can Republicans go forward to try to regain these voters that they've lost by turning their backs on them and basically saying publicly that they do not support a bailout, which would have put, I think, millions out of the job. When it was basically a minimal investment from Washington, when you compare it to the financial bailout and the jobs that were able to be spared through that bailout. I mean, what would your response to that?
Let our young people
Companies fail because they have bad business practices. It's not always the fault of the members of the company, those who work for it. But if a company fails, it fails for a reason. It's not, sure, it's emotional impact. My dad worked for companies that failed. He had to find another job. These things happen. This is life. This is reality. And the fact of the matter is, when you take money from successful businesses and subsidize an unsuccessful business, there's a problem there. That doesn't create an incentive for businesses to thrive and do well in this economy. So I understand. I have personal friends and relations who they would not be doing as well if they had lost their jobs at GM and their families had lost that money, and they have that personal connection. But the fact of the matter is, bailing out companies is and this word's thrown around a lot, but it is. It's an act of socialism. It's things that governments are not supposed to do in a free society. In a free society, you have the right to succeed, but it also means you have the right to fail. And you have to fail if it happens. Look at Thomas Edison. The man, made what, 1,000 inventions. Most of them were garbage, and no one ever accepted them. And he had the light bulb, which made him famous. Failure is a risk you take in a free society. When you take away the risks, when you take away the rewards, the risk isn't worth it. So for a person who goes, well, all I have to do is buy some favor in the government, and I can run a crappy business, and they'll just keep pumping money in here, and I don't have to ever create a product that's worth, anything, compared, it's more worth than another company's product. What's the point? I mean, if you want to have a successful and prosperous economy with successful and prosperous people, you have to have risk. You have to, there's no reward without risk, and that's just how it works. It's not healthy to give someone a heroin fix when they're a junkie, and you need the bad medicine to go through detox, and that's bankruptcy. And that's what they should have done. It shouldn't have been a government-managed bankruptcy. It should have just been bankruptcy. They would have come out stronger. Companies do it all the time. They would have then grown again. They would have had a slimmer business. They would have been more profitable. They would have paid their employees more. It would have been painful, but you got to take the bad medicine sometimes to get better.
So do the financial institutions have to take that bad medicine? That's what I'm asking.
Well, when it comes to the banks, we have a monetary system
across the board.
Well, the Republican Party, there are members who differ, and I'm sure on this panel here will differ about solutions. But I myself, I'm a follower of the Austrian School of Economics. Most people today are Keynesians, and they believe that the government needs to inject funds to make up the difference in the economy. And of course, I would argue that's been proven false time and time again. The Soviet system did that, it failed. Every socialist country's done that, it's failed. It only creates more debt. The banking institutions were all thriving off trading paper. It's not wealth, it's just them saying this piece of paper is worth something because we say so. And we'll sell it at a premium and risk 500% profit. They'll get that, and then when the whole thing falls apart because there's nothing backing it, they go, well, the government's got to bail us out. That system's not sustainable. It hasn't been. And the idea that you have to bail out any institution that has a failed practice, again, is counterintuitive completely. I mean, emotionally, it feels good to get that money in your wallet and to say, oh, the system's been saved. But we've heard time and time again that the sky is going to fall, and it hasn't when companies haven't been bailed out before. So it wasn't necessary, and I would say that even on this panel, we're going to differ on the TARP bailouts and whatnot.
Thank you, Dave.
I want to add something here real quick. My father actually works for General Motors, so I'm also very tied into the auto industry, very affected by what happened in 2009 or 2010. And I'm going to differ a little bit from Republican orthodoxy when I say this, but I think that the auto industry actually might warrant a little bit of a special exception that the financial industry did not warrant. That the auto industry, if you recall back in World War II, was essentially the arsenal of democracy. And so much of the supplier network that the auto industry relies on is also integrated with our defense network and defense suppliers throughout the United States. These are industries that we cannot simply outsource to Japan and China. I mean, when we're dealing with suppliers that are also working with our defense industry, we have to make sure that those are American jobs because we can't rely on China to make our tanks for us. Really, what happens with the auto industry is if one of the big three were to collapse or were to fail, the effects, as we know, I mean, it's pretty well accepted. The effects throughout the entire auto industry would just be horrendous, and they take down the whole chain of suppliers with them in a lot of regards. So that's the one reason why I could see warranting a little bit of special attention to the auto industry. Now, again, is it as important as it was in World War II? No. We've diversified the defense industry to a large extent. And that's more my neocon side, I guess, coming in and making sure that we have a strong national defense and national security. I do, however, think that at the end of the day, it could have been achieved. What happened in late 2009 or 2010 could have been achieved through the private sector. Actually, Mitt Romney, of all people, suggested that we let the big three go bankrupt. And actually, when the whole thing was said and done, and now that it's resolved, that looks like a pretty attractive solution. Now, it looks like that would have been a pretty attractive solution to let them do it in the private sector as opposed to having it go the public route, because the public route, there were government funds tied up. The unions did get all sorts of payouts that they might not have deserved as much as someone like a pension holder, like my father, who's a salary worker at General Motors. He might have deserved. He had a lot of his benefits stripped.
Okay, can you kind of wrap it up there?
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, what I'm saying is, if the money would have come from the private sector, and if we would have had a private sector solution.
Yeah, that's 2 minutes, and then into the varsity, so I want to talk on.
Okay. 10 minutes. Okay.
Private sector solution would have been proper.
I just want to add one quick thing. I don't have much to add. Great, you guys are awesome. Not to mention that it's unconstitutional. Okay, it's very important that you understand rule of law. Okay, it's unconstitutional. The Constitution of the United States does not give Congress the ability or the authority to pick winners and losers in business. Corporate welfare is what we're talking about right now. Corporate welfare is against the Constitution of the United States of America. I understand that there are personal stories attached to these situations, and far be it for me to say that's not important. Of course it is. But if we're going to govern our nation based upon our personal relationships and the affiliative tone of our experiences, then we're in trouble. We've got to have some kind of...
Why do you think that was in the Constitution to begin with?
Well, I think the founders understood that we can't have a laissez-faire government where we just do whatever they want to do. We got to have rule of law. We got to have some standards. And the other thing is, you start talking about corporate welfare, government picking winners and losers. Who's this? I mean, why does government, or why should government have a right to say that some businesses are worthy of bailing out? And what about all these small businesses in our country that don't get those kind of bailouts? I mean, are those families any less important than the families of those who work at General Motors? I don't think so. So I don't want to say that your family, or my family, are more important than those rural families who lost manufacturing jobs and didn't get that bailout. So at some point we got to have rule of law. I know that's tough, but if we're going to continue to reward bad businesses and punish good businesses, what do I mean when I say punish good businesses? The egregious tax codes that we have, the highest corporate tax code in the world, except for maybe Japan. I think I know we're like 35%. So you might have good management and good business, but they're being penalized for being successful. So they have to take their business overseas. So doesn't that create job loss? So you have to have a balanced perspective. So we can't reward bad businesses, punish good businesses, pick winners and losers, and continue to violate the Constitution.
Brian, do you want to add anything related to the bailout?
I'm going to go on too long, so we get everything that they said. I'm interested in. I think they all have a unique perspective.
Okay, a lot of these questions have been hit with comments related to what we've been talking about. So I'll just go to a different subject here. And why do you think the GOP Republican Party is better for the future of the United States as it relates to national security? Take that on.
What was the question?
Why do you think the GOP is better for the future of the United States, or current United States, as it relates to national security?
Well, I think we're going to find some different opinion on the panel here when it comes to that a little bit.
Okay, no, that's okay.
I'll be quick, though. I'll just say that
That's right.
the GOP is best for national security for the United States because at least the wing of the GOP I belong to, the more libertarian wing, believes in a non-interventionist foreign policy. Look, we should be the strongest nation in the world. We should have the largest military, the most well-funded, but we spend more than all the other countries in the world combined on the military. Probably I think it's like twice as much as all the other countries in the world combined. And that the biggest cost for us is having bases all around the world and being so interventionist and getting in other people's business. And that we could have a Navy 3 to 4 times the size we have now. We could have an Air Force, the same. Military could be large, more bases here domestically. If we stop subsidizing the defense of Europe and Japan and South Korea, these are first world nations, first world countries that can afford to take care of themselves. Europe has a great public transportation system because the hundreds of billions that they don't spend on national defense get spent on their public transportation. So the United States actually could be, with the GOP, far safer than the Democrats, because the Democrats honestly do believe in sticking their noses in every single country in the world, sending money to dictatorships around the world, funding, subsidizing farming, subsidizing food in Africa so that the farmers there that are trying to sell their products starve to death because they can't sell their crops because everyone else is giving all the crops for free. The GOP doesn't, at least in my part of the GOP, doesn't believe in that, and that there's no wing in the Democratic Party for that. There's no sector in the Democratic Party typically that has that philosophy. So, if you want, a strong national defense and a safe America, the GOP is for you.
Anyone else want to hit that one?
I'll get into it real quick. I don't disagree with some of the things that Dave said. I think that some of Dave's folks have a good approach to the argument that we have maybe too many bases in foreign countries that could and should provide for their own national defense, particularly European countries. It's been my perspective for a long time that European countries were allowed to have the giant social welfare systems that they have because they don't have to spend money on defense because the United States provides it for them. So that argument I definitely find a lot of merits in. I don't agree with a non-interventionist foreign policy. I think there are legitimate threats in the world that aren't just the cause of American intervention. I think Islamic radicalism is real. I think that China is trying to grow their military and may act aggressively in the next 5 to 10 years. I think Russia is doing the same right now. Russia is funding the Syrian government right now. We just discovered that Russia and China are funding the Syrian government in sort of in different areas of the Islamic world that are becoming more and more hostile. So I think there are legitimate threats out there. I do agree with the United States spending their resources wisely. I'm certain that there are areas in the defense budget that could be leaner. But I don't agree with the non-intervention perspective. I think the Republican Party is a party of strong national security, and that means different things to different people. But
actually, I kind of somewhat of an expert in this field. My major is information assurance, which is computer security, and I'm actually trying to get into a master's for it right now. But China and the rest of the world actually attacks our servers 50,000 times a day.
Cyber attacks, yeah.
And that actually we've done research and found there's only really 2 places the next world war can happen, either Africa or online. And the major funding needs to be going to support our systems, which are out of date. And because it's funding great, but if you break down your computer networks, all those communications are useless. So that's, and I know, I'm not sure the whole Republican Party as a whole, but I know there's a lot of support towards...
You'll see, and we're talking about, there's differing perspectives on how we should address certain potential threats. Another surveillance threat, the Russian government.
I think there's like 30,000 open positions in my field at the current time, and that's one area I feel like funding training needs to be going to.
Stacy, do you want to add something?
I just want to say, I'm going to go right back to the Constitution. Strong defense is a central part of the purpose of the United States Constitution. You have to understand why the Constitution was written. Strong defense is a big part of that. Speaking of the logistics of terrorism, I'm going to say that I agree with my Republican brother here that stealth jihadism across the globe, not just in America, is a very serious issue. I host a political commentary. I had a gentleman by the name of Robert Spencer on my show, Jihad Watch. And, just doing some research on this, just from a historical perspective, let's take it back all the way to the, 7th and 8th century, okay? Go back throughout the annals of history and look at what Islam has done. Any nation, I don't care where you go. You can pick Europe, you can pick Africa, Northern Africa, I don't care. Wherever nation you pick, where this ideology, we're not talking about a religion, we're talking about an ideology. Understand the difference between the two. Where this ideology has essentially become the basis for centralized government and their concept of rule of law, there has never been freedom. And if anybody can show me differently, I'd like to see it. You won't be able to do it. They don't believe in freedom the same way that we do. They don't believe in the same freedom of expression that we have to debate as Republicans versus Democrats, conservatives versus liberals, and all the things that we enjoy in America. We couldn't do that overseas in any nation where Islamic ideology controls the concepts of freedom. And understand it's very serious. And we're facing the potential of Sharia right here in this country. And so I just want to warn you not to underestimate the dangers of the ideology of what some people call radicalized Islam. I'm going to tell you that I disagree. It is not radicalized Islam. It is the ideology of Islam as a doctrine. Okay? I've read the Quran at least 4 times. And I'm telling you, from a doctrinal standpoint, an ideological standpoint, they believe in complete subjugation. Now, again, don't take my word for it. I challenge you. Do your own independent research. Go find a country. You can find me at stacyswimp.net. Find me. Let me know. Have you ever found or seen anywhere in the world where this doctrine, this ideology, is allowed to run free, where there is freedom? That's what we know.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to wrap it up. We can take another question from the audience. Okay.
How do you guys feel, what's your stance on the recent Republicans' view that all insurance companies and employers should be able to choose if they can cover birth control or not choose.
Well, I mean, a free society is all about choices. And the idea that the government should be able to mandate on an individual or an organization what choices they should or can and cannot make is anathema to what America really stands for. And the idea that you're going to impose some sort of set of values upon any religion or any organization that may have certain rules for its membership. Because you buy insurance from any place voluntarily. No one sticks a gun to your head and says you're going to go buy this insurance and then you're going to pay for someone else's contraceptive. So the Republican Party is really just saying we believe in free choice. And the idea that we're going to force someone to make any choice against their will is just, it's outlandish and something that I would say is, again, anathema to everything America stands for. So that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Dave. Anyone else want to do that one?
I agree with him. I think Dave hit it right on. I think it's about the mandates on healthcare and what kind of policies you should buy, and especially when you're dealing with private companies and private institutions and telling them exactly what they should be doing. And I think that it's an issue of, well, it's become a multi-pronged issue. It's become a religious freedom issue. It's become an economic issue in the use of government and how we want to use government. And I think it's threatening in a number of different ways to a number of different people. And it's offensive to everyone from the folks that are offended by the aspect of the Catholic Church folks all the way through to people that just support individual choice.
No. Okay. One more thing, I just had another thought that being college students here, and the subject came up a little bit earlier, it's in the media a lot about tuition, that where the college students seem to be concerned about tuition going up and how we're going to pay for it, and money coming from the states and government and so forth. Anybody want to hit that one a little bit? Talk about how we can get tuition down, how we can make it easier for college students, and how the GOP sees that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about it briefly. College tuition, the president's come out and given his address on the crisis of college tuition. What he doesn't tell you is all his friends that are donating to him at universities are the ones that are eating up all that money. Universities, and to some extent, a university has to compete like anyone else does for students. They build nice facilities like this that everyone can come into and enjoy student activities and things like that. But universities are spending a whole lot of money on administration and on faculty and on buildings versus what they're spending on education and what they're charging kids to go. And the whole student loan issue is a whole issue separate issue together. The fact that universities are basically subsidized by the student loan industry to take on as many students as possible, and to we're creating this sort of student loan bubble. And there are multi-problems involved with that. But there's also the factor that a lot of universities are sitting on very large endowments that they're spending money. Now, granted, some of these are private universities that are allowed to do what they want, but public universities, we may want to look at things like universities spending their endowments on lowering tuition costs for students. And that would be done probably on a more state level, because public universities are funded primarily through their state governments. But yeah, students are paying way too much money to go to school, and it's sort of falsely created the price of tuition, and it's an issue that everyone's concerned with. But I don't think the current message that you're hearing about why tuition is high is exactly the reason that it's high, what the president's telling you.
I'd like to expand on what he was just
Sure.
finishing with. He's really right. The real discussion isn't, yes, tuitions are high and costs continue to go up, but the real question is why is that? And yeah, you touched upon the fact that schools are spending more on infrastructure than they are actually educating. There's a lot of other costs, that. But really, it's also a monetary issue. The fact of the matter is that wherever the government gets involved and injects money into something, the relationship between the provider of services and the receiver of services is diminished, and the price incentives in the marketplace and signals disappear. So when governments continually injecting money into the school system, they then lose the incentive to compete against each other and to lower costs and increase services. They then go, well, whatever we charge, the government's just going to pay it because everyone's getting federal loans, so we can just continually increase tuition. Sure, the students will complain because their future debts will be higher, but the government's going to pay up anyways because the government can print all the money it wants to fund that, sell all the bonds it wants to fund that. So if you get the government, or you reduce the amount of influence the government has in education, get them out of it, prices will actually will drop down because schools will have to compete. Look at, 70 years ago, people went to school, they worked, part-time, they were able to pay for tuition. My father back in the 60s went to college and was able to work his way through. He never had to get any federal loans. It was the moment government really started getting involved in Vietnam with the GI Bills, and even after World War II, and costs started just continually going up, and now after the dollar's off gold, of course, inflation is also causing an issue where your fathers and mothers, wages don't go up, as inflation does. So everything costs more, including school, but the solution really is to get government out of education in the first place, and I think that's where the GOP really stands, the Democrats.
Thanks, Steve. Well, I think we're out of time. Thanks, everybody, for coming. And, hope we all learned something today. Have a great day. I think lunch shall be served now.
Appreciate what you have to say. I work with two counties. Right.